Hi, today I want to start out with Unit 4 and talk about how to create graphical applications. We've been playing around in the playground, and you can still add playgrounds to projects so that you can experiment with things and see the contents of memory and try those kinds of stuff as we go. You won't need them so much in this unit, but once we get into some of the later units, you might need that playground capability. I'm still trying to figure out exactly where the playground fits into the picture once you've learned syntax. But if you're trying to sort out some kind of logic, playground might help. Might help you see what's going on behind the scenes. In this unit, we're going to first learn how to create a project that is not a playground. So let's start. I'm going to start Xcode. I'm also recording this full screen, so we'll see how that goes. And what we want to do is start a new Xcode project, not a playground. So launch a new Xcode project. And when you do, you'll be asked, what kind of project do you want? We're going to start simple and create a single view application. You'll see the same thing I am, right? Okay. And then what do we want to call this? Well, according to my notes, let me shrink this down a little bit so I can move back and forth a little quicker. I want to give the product a name. Okay, which is basically your project name. So I'm going to call this my Unit 4 in-class project. Should give it a better name when you have something, but we're just dinking around with it anyways. So once you're creating your projects, make sure they're a little better. What do you have for organization name?
My name.
Your name? Cool. Leave it. Okay. Do you have an organizational identifier?
No.
No. Trying to remember, I think my notes tell me organizational identifier is your reverse web address. So what you might, if you have your own website, you could in here, mine would be com.vokergal, and that's where I would stop. That's my reverse web address because it's a com site. It's kind of a category if you think of it. It's a com site, and then there's a vokergal site. What you can put in there is edu.mstc. Next semester, what we'll do is put this thing in there, and what that is our development account, and you'll be able to transfer your applications to devices if that's what you want to do. Okay, but for right now, what you put in there really doesn't matter, but I would say just put in edu.mstc and let it be. The bundle identifier, probably based on your organization ID that you put up here.
And the product name.
Pardon me?
And the product name.
And a product name. All right. Change the language to Swift. We've decided not to use Objective-C, and so far everything that I've learned and played with, and my morning didn't go as planned. The update took an hour on both machines, so I didn't get to play with much. But far as I can tell, Swift works just fine using the techniques. I did update my notes. I just posted the new ones this morning. The ones that were up there until now were Objective-C notes, so now there's Swift notes. The process is pretty much the same. For your device, change it to an iPhone. If it's not an iPhone already, that gives us a relatively small screen to work with. The emulator runs a little bit faster. Phones are typically where people start, and then they develop from there. There is an iPad option. There's also a universal option saying it'll work for all of them, but we're just going to keep it small. We could turn off core data. Probably not a bad idea. Let's turn off core data. Core data allows us to access the database. We're not going to do that until Unit 6. So in the meantime, we'll turn that off. Should shrink our project down a little bit. Once you've specified this on this machine, your name, your organization, your language, your devices, your core data, all that stuff will be filled in. I didn't change much of any of it, and all you have to do is really provide a product name. Next, where do you want to put it? I'm going to put mine on my desktop. Actually, yeah, I'll put it on there. It might be a little bit faster. We'll put it in here. I'm going to put it in a folder. I have my in-class folder, and I put it in there. And then you get a screen that shows you kind of the properties of the project itself. We're not going to be doing much with this. We'll be replacing it here in just a second. So here's your project name. Decide you want to change it. You can change it up there. You can change compatibility. Not sure why this is still stuck at Xcode 3.2, but that's what we've got, so we'll stick with it. Tab spacing, I did hear from one of my friends or fellow instructors that messing with tab spacing is not a good idea because a lot of people don't. So if you mess with it, because I like 3 personally, I think 4 is too many. I like 3, I change it, and then I put my code, give it to somebody else, and everything's out of whack, and they start typing in the indentations all screwy. You send me assignments, the indentation is all screwy. So the standard terminology or the standard philosophy nowadays is don't mess with the tab lines or tab spaces.
It's really messy when you have source control,
Uh-huh.
and if someone else changed the tab spacing,
Yep, and then if you're
then
sharing
you have
code
a
with
whole
other
bunch of
people,
changes, and
yep.
you gotta merge them.
Yep, so that actually looks like changes, and it's not really changes, it's just indentations. So source control, another reason not to change that, so we're gonna leave it alone. Over here on the left-hand side is the contents of your project folder. Just like in Visual Studio, when you create a project in iOS, it's not just one file. Even the playground was 3 files. They were just stuck into a folder with a special playground icon on it. So your folder, your project is divided up into many files. Well, let's see what my notes tell me we should be looking at. Well, my notes first say, let's run it. Okay, so here's your run button. If you don't hit the arrow, you should be able to just click the big triangle and watch it run. And the build succeeded, so hopefully I'll see my emulator here pretty quick. Yours might take a little longer because it's the first time.
It was behind the screen.
It was behind it? Okay, so it's probably already there. There's my icon for it down here in the tray. There it is. But it's not done yet.
Big phone.
It's a big phone. Right? Actually, it's zoomed in. You can look at it. It must be the new one, right? Because it does say that this is iOS 8, iPhone 6, so it is the big one.
I have iPhone 5.
If it's 5, don't worry about it. And you can change all these things, but it is still running. It's still loading. It does take a little while. My advice is once this is loaded, leave it. You can close it. Okay, here it comes. There's our project. And since there's nothing on the main screen, that's kind of what you see. That's your welcome screen. Now, I'll be surprised to see if this goes away. I think we haven't set up the main screen. There it goes. We haven't set up the main screen, so this is what we have. My favorite story about iOS, my instructor in Eric Knapp in Madison Area Technical College tells us that when the iPhone first came out and the development for it first happened, somebody sold this app that you're looking at right here for 99 cents. Called it Flashlight. Because if you run it, it's just this white screen and you can now use your iPhone as a flashlight. And sold it and made a few $1,000s on a flashlight app. It's one of the first ones that was out there, sold it for 99 cents. People said, cool. If you had any programming experience at all, you know, you just created a project, saved it, and off you went. You know, he did that, and then later it grew into multicolors and flashing and all kinds of stuff. But it started off as just a white screen. So just like most programs, we now have the ability to do a kind of a hello world. There's no hello world here. That's new in the older versions of iOS. They used to throw up some kind of a message here. We're going to control it. The other thing that's new that you saw was that splash screen that showed up. That's new. I haven't had a chance to investigate it in the past. That's never shown up before. So what iOS is kind of doing, Xcode is doing for us here, is creating this splash screen with our project name on it.
I didn't see that on mine.
You didn't see it come up?
No.
I didn't see it.
Could be that I'm running the latest and greatest beta here and you guys haven't. If you wish to come in, won't be Wednesday because we don't have class, but if you want to come in around 9 o'clock on Monday, we can start the installation process and make sure we're all on the same page. We all have the same version. They're still throwing new ones up about every 10 days. But there is no more Xcode 5, I noticed. You can't download Xcode 5 anymore. You now have to download Xcode 6. I'm using 6.1 beta 2, whatever that means. So I think that's what I downloaded because if you go to help, it doesn't show that. If you didn't see the welcome screen, we'll add that next week. But you're going to have to come in early to make that happen. Okay, so we got it running. Let's leave that. It didn't take terribly long. Okay, for that, this is actually a simulator to come up. It's a subtle difference between simulator and emulator. A simulator uses the host machine, this iMac's memory and processing power to simulate an iPhone, versus an emulator that actually emulates the RAM and emulates the processor and everything else. The Android program uses an emulator. That one took forever to load. And once it loaded, you needed to leave it alone. Nick, you remember that, right? The Android, first time you launched it, it was slow.
It probably still would be loaded, yeah.
Probably still is. This was relatively fast. We're not making it do much, but it was relatively fast. If you accidentally close it, I mean, you got to have it selected, and then you come up here to simulator and quit. It's hard to quit. Okay, so let's leave it run. All right, back to my notes. iOS simulator will launch. Talked about 99-cent flashlight. This is a simulator. The downside to using a simulator is it may actually give you the misrepresentation of the processing speed of your device, of your app. Because it's using our 8 gig of RAM versus I'm guessing 1 gig of RAM in an iOS 8 device, or in the iPhone 6. I think it has 1 gig of RAM. I haven't checked lately. It could run fast here and then go on the device and run slower because it doesn't have as much memory to play with. But we're not writing anything that large, so it shouldn't cause any trouble. If you do need to quit the emulator or the simulator, excuse me, just click on it. I usually go up here, but the command quit will do it as well. There's a scaling, so if you're trying to run this on a screen that doesn't work very well, we can do the Windows scale. Mine's right now at 50%. So we could go to 100%, and now it's even bigger just so you can see stuff a little bit better, but I kind of like the scale at 50%.
Your 50% is about the size of my 100%.
Yeah. Not 100% of the actual device, it's 100% of the screen size that you're working with. I don't know where the numbers come from. I'm going to stick with 50 because it fits and I can see the entire thing. All right, the file structure. Over here on the left is your project. In there you will find an AppDelegate Swift file. This has changed. If you're looking at old notes, there used to be 2 files, an AppDelegate M and an AppDelegate H file. That's the beauty of Swift. All of those have been blended into one. Once upon a time, I think you told you the story in the classes assignment, every time you built a class, and it's really what the AppDelegate is a class, every time you built a class, there was an H file called the header file that taught other programs how to communicate with your class. And then there was the M file. I don't remember what M stood for, do you? No. M file that actually had the code in it, the methods in it. Maybe that's what it stands for. But that was annoying. And trying to keep track of which to put where, and later on we're going to do some wiring here, what to wire to who. That was complicated sometimes, and wire to the wrong places. Right. Now with Swift, it's all in one file. We can open up any one of these by single-clicking them. The delegate we're not going to mess with too much. I've increased my font size, so if yours isn't this big, that's normal. I made it bigger so that you can see it. And that's under Xcode preferences someplace. But these are all events that kind of happen automatically. Here's the application will resign. Resign simply means it's no longer in the forefront. It's giving some other app like the phone. Maybe the phone rings when your app is running. What should your app do when it resigns? You can write code. For instance, if you've got half of a database record on the screen, you could save some of that. If you're working on a text file, you could save it. Will resign, we saw that. It did enter the background. Your program's still running. It's different than resigning. Okay. Did enter the foreground. What happens when we come back? What happens when we become active? And what happens when we terminate? So these are all kind of events that we can respond to that are automatically happen when your app comes to the front, goes to the back, etc. We're not going to be messing with too many of those. We used to have to go to the AppDelegate to make certain things happen. We'll see. It won't be in this unit, but we'll see if we still have to. Close one of these windows isn't real easy. I don't see any up here. You might be able, once we get more tabs, close them here, but in general they all kind of park into one tab. And let's go into the ViewController. The ViewController is think of Visual Studio now. Right? Behind the scenes, when you double-click the form, went to code view, is basically what we saw. View did load, that's form load. Okay. View did receive a memory warning, gotta hope we never run into that. But I believe we have to leave it because, well, this is an override. Let's see what happens if I delete that. I don't expect any of my apps to wipe out to overload memory of my device, not in this class. Right. But that was in there automatically. If you're writing your first big for production, you might really put that back in there. I'm going to take it out and see if I get any errors. I don't see any errors. I'm going to try running again. Notice there's also a stop button that's basically telling the simulator to stop executing. Normally you don't have to tell it to stop. When you tell it to run, it'll rebuild your current application and reload it into the simulator, replacing the app that's there. This simulator actually has your app. There used to be a home key on the view screen here. It's not there anymore. If you want to get back to the main screen, go to the hardware and do a home screen. If you can remember the Shift Command H, then you're great, better than I am. But that brings you back to this page. And notice I have icons for the one I was playing with, the test file, and the one I'm working with right now. So this looks like a typical iPhone screen. If you want to launch one of these apps, you can launch it by clicking on it, same as a tap. Okay. Later on, we'll learn how to get into the background of it and kill the app and uninstall it and do some of those kind of things if you need to. Occasionally that comes in handy, particularly with database apps. We want the database file to be regenerated. We remove the app altogether. So it is running on top. You just have to remember all the shortcut keys to get back and forth. Okay, so there's my view did load. We can put stuff in there and we'll take care of that in a little bit. So that's some code. This is form load, and once you learn how to write, well, we know how to write Swift code. Underneath that, we can do a bunch of other stuff. Notice they put some nice comments in here for us. Your name should already be in there. Date's already in there. You even have a copyright. How nice is that? Now the main thing is the storyboard. This was new last year in Visual Studio. Let's try this again. In Xcode, the storyboard was brand new last year. We still had views. A view, by the way, is the same thing as I don't know if page is the right word, or form in Visual Studio. It's a page that you can lay out. And then from this view, you can connect to another view. You might remember when we created our project, there was a multi-view project. Okay. We're going to start with a single view project and then move from there. By default, we get this any kind of a layout here, so I'm going to go into here. It says iPhone 6 is what I'm laying out for, but it doesn't look like it's quite my iPhone 6, unless I'm supposed to scroll. It doesn't look like an iPhone 6. I did this the other day. How did I figure that out? Help me out if you find it before I do.
Click that. Any on the bottom?
Down at the bottom, the width, any height and width.
Yeah,
Click. Base values. Not doing it for me.
Click one of those.
If you click that, click down there, and then you can select how you want it.
Hover over the button.
So if you hover over those, so if you go down, that's a vertical layout.
What was I on before?
What's that?
What was I on before? There, that looks more like a phone. So that did do the width. And the height is regular and the width is any.
A portrait or a landscape.
That wasn't what I did before. I would have sworn it was an easier way to do that. And we set it up for iOS 6, so you would have thought they would set it up for iOS 6. I'm also going to go to my zoom here and see if I can find my zoom for this view. I guess I'm going to have to do a little more research on that. But there's our app. We can scroll through it. That's our screen. Pardon me?
Right click.
I got that.
Outside the window, maybe?
I'll go with that. Okay, there's our form. It should have been a little easier to set that up. Actually, it should have come up, I would have thought, into the iOS phone 6 layout anyways, and this does kind of look like it, so we'll start there. So what we did is just change the height to regular, the width, compact, any regular height. I don't know why width does that. That's weird. I'll have to look at that a little bit more. Okay, here's our stuff. So what do we do with that? This is called two things. It's called either a view or it's called a scene. We're creating a storyboard. We're going to see this in the next unit when we do multi-views. We're going to create a storyboard where this page links to that page, links to that page, and this storyboard will actually show you that. Show you the pages and how they link to each other. Each one of the storyboards is a scene, probably going into the Disney cartoon system where they do storyboards and go from one scene to the next to the next. So these are often referred to as scenes, also referred to as views. That's what they used to be referred to before the storyboard came along. And it's still a ViewController code. So a lot of that stuck. Down here at the bottom of the right-hand side of the screen, we have a bunch of objects, and this is the toolbox.
I don't see that.
If you don't see this, then try clicking this button up here at the top. Okay, these three buttons allow you to show the left-hand side of the screen, the bar at the bottom of the screen, or the bar at the right. That help?
That's it.
There's no objects.
There's no objects down here. Then try selecting the attributes inspector up here at the top.
That's for the top screen. There's another toolbar right above there.
There's another toolbar here.
Down.
Here. Oh, this one. Try that one.
I found it.
Okay. Show the object library versus you maybe here.
Yep.
Okay. So there's the object library.
Okay.
Sorry, once you do this stuff, it sticks and I forget what the default settings is and it won't go back for me, so that's why mine already looks that way. Just keep telling me when yours doesn't look like mine. You can resize. Don't recommend it because once we pick objects and get them onto the form, this is where your properties are going to appear, or attributes as they're referred to in iOS. The attributes, you're going to want a lot of screen space to pick from those. So here's all your tools, all kinds of stuff here, just like in Visual Studio. There's a lot of them there we won't even touch. Some of them you feel free to experiment with. There's a lot there. If you wish, you can search. Down here is a search bar at the very bottom of the screen, and you could type in, I want a label, and it'll find all of the objects that have label in their name. You don't have to know the exact name of the object, but you should have a clue to what kind of stuff what kind of name it has, or at least part of the name. To add one of these into your view or into your scene, simply drag it and park it where you want it to go. And then you can resize it. And over here, as I promised you, a bunch of properties. Notice I have a scroll bar, so there's even more properties down below. Let's take a quick look at those. What kind of text do you want in this label? If you're going to change the font within this label, not the font of the label itself, but you're going to have one word that's size 10 and another word that's size 15, and then you need to create an attributed text so that you can apply attributes to each kind of text. I've never done that. Mine are always plain. You want to change the text. Simple, type it there. You could also come over here and double click and type it here. Either way works. One lesson learned that I got a little while ago is don't put this too high up because you'll cover up. This will actually sit on top of the emulator or the simulator's bar up here with its clock. You can put text and stuff up there. Actually, when you put a screen background, you would want it to cover that up, and it does. So when you put these in, make sure you tuck them underneath. About there gives you enough space between your label and the top of the bar. So learn that when I was playing around. You want to mess with the font, you can change the size here slightly. And if you want to mess with the font even more, click the T that sits in there and you'll get a separate font dialog. When you click, that's not what I want. Family is what I want to change. Here's a bunch of fonts. Wish we could look at them as we were touching them, but there's no real easy way to do that. Experiment with the fonts for a minute. One of these, I thought when I double clicked it, opened up a dialog on the side, but I don't see it happening here. How many lines deep do you want it? Normally it's 1. If you need a multi-line label, then you can adjust it. Here's your text alignment. So if I want the label to be this wide, but my text to be centered inside it, I can do that. And then a bunch of stuff that I've hardly ever taken a look at, whether it's highlighted. Here's the color if you do need to or want to change it. Add shadows. Transparency. And now this stuff over here, the drawing stuff, we need to take a quick look at. The information that I'm sharing with you came out of the iOS 7 book that we used last year. I didn't find it as a very friendly book. Topics seem to be all over the place, but it did have information in it. It's just a matter of finding it and dragging it out. So I'm sharing most of that information. If you, maybe this is kind of a homework assignment, to go out and find some iOS resources that are out there, and let's add that to our wiki so that we all can have some places to go when you find good ones for creating graphical apps like this. We've got a good book source for Swift, but we need something for graphical. If you've bought a book, and Nick might still have it from the last time. No, you didn't take this version of the class, right? You just took Android? Yeah. If you don't have it, then it'd be nice to have some kind of a resource, excuse me. If the screen layout is not the correct size, select the ViewController button at the top of the main screen. So that's the part I should have read. Click, and now this would probably be the correct size. In the utilities, change the view size, and I recommended an iUtilities. Utilities, that was here, I think. It's a file inspector. Is it this guy? Assistant editor. Half the time there's so much stuff. Each one of these is a separate screen. Finding the right one is often a challenge. Let's see if this tells me where. In utilities view, change the size property. Where's the utilities? Symbol, find. Probably over here, view controller, still no size. Size inspector, nope. Attributes. It's gonna take a while to get used to these.
In the view utilities, scroll up.
It says hide the utilities, but I'm not even
No,
sure.
no, on the, when you clicked on the view controller,
Yeah.
and it brought it up, scroll up on the toolbar on the left side, on the right side. Well, it looks like you already got it.
Oh, I see.
Because I have a thing that says
I got it.
simulated metrics.
Click view controller.
On the,
Click
on the view, the yellow square, click that.
Then you go to the
It's not, up.
one with the option on the right. Where, and
There you go,
standard metric.
simulated metrics.
Okay. So click this and go back to the attributes inspector. Notice right now it's inferred from what? Oh, we're gonna go with iPhone 4. I notice it got a little smaller on me, so now I'm gonna grab my label and pull it over. Was there an iPhone 6 there?
That's the size of the screen.
Yeah, screen size is 4 inches. The new iPhones are the bigger ones are 5.5. So we'll go with the 4 one, and now it's a little bit more manageable. There we go. Thank you. Shouldn't say utilities. It should say the attributes. Change the size. Recommend 4. Okay. Scroll through the objects. Once you find one, go. All right. And there is also, when we're down here in the objects, you can clear out the search, and if you click on this, you get kind of a different view, but the problem with this one is you have to know what they are. But a lot of the ones that we use, labels, buttons, these are kind of like radio buttons, text, sliders, checkboxes, progress bars. A lot of these you might recognize. And so once you get comfortable with them, you don't have to scroll through them one line at a time. The other view shows you the names and what they do. And we'll experiment with all of these as we go along. Let's make sure this works. Let's run.
Mine doesn't have a big-
And now my label is showing on the screen. So the objects down there, we looked at the label, there's a button. Text field for entering text. There's an image view to display pictures. We'll see that in a second. There's a date picker that we can use. It's kind of different than what we're used to, but remember this is supposed to be designed for a touch device versus our Visual Studio processing. So the date picker looks a little different. It's just a general picker view, which is a combo box. There's an iOS switch. There's a segmented control. It's all kinds of controls that you can play with, and part of the assignment will be to experiment with those.
How did you get the label to show up on the simulator?
I had to run it.
Okay.
According to my notes, we want to add a second label. So let's go find the label control again and just drag another one. Notice there's all kinds of alignment bars. Okay, this one says it's centered in the screen. So now you know that your object is centered. And you can align them with each other or with the screen itself. Selecting objects, nothing too magical here. To select one, simply click it. To deselect it, click on something else. If you want to turn everything off, it's sometimes hard not to select anything. You can come out here. The book used to refer to this area out here as a grid. You could actually show a grid there. But as far as I was concerned, the grid was distracting and annoying, so I turned it off. Does yours show a grid? Very subtle gray grid?
Nope.
Good. That was annoying. You can always click out here. It deselects everything. To select multiple objects, drag a box, or command click, or shift click. So I can drag a box. All I have to do is touch them. You don't have to surround them. Or you can click, command click. Let's try that again. It's different than most programs. Most programs you option click to select multiples. Here it's doing something different. Notice my red lines. I'm not sure what the option is doing, but it's not selecting multiples. You can shift click. When you shift click an object, it doesn't deselect it. You want to deselect it, like select a bunch by dragging and then deselect it. You have to use a command key, and then you can select and deselect. So I stick with command to do multiple selections. I first drag if I can. And once you have multiple selected, then the attributes over here will change to allow you to change things consistently across all those objects.
Option apparently duplicate.
Option, oh that's right, option lets you copy and drag. So if I wanted another one of these, option, drag, I got another one. Command Z to undo, you are using a Mac, Control Z won't do it. We already talked about aligning objects. I can move them around. One of the things though that we want to do is turn off the auto layout. The book recommended turning this off. Auto layout moves things around in a way that, in a way that Apple thinks is a good idea. I found it more annoying than anything else. We can turn that off. These are the auto layout options down here. You can drag a bunch of things onto the form and then use these to try to get them to align up automatically. If you wish to experiment with it, you can, but I usually turn it off. The book recommends turning them off. Select the scene, show the file inspector, that's this button in your toolbar, kind of tough to find, and turn off auto layout. So I'm going to select the scene, choose this button, the file inspector, and somewhere here it's auto layout, turn off. Get a warning. Okay. Disables the size classes, but for our purposes that's going to be just fine not to have that. And now these buttons down here are gone. They don't distract you. We don't use them anyways. One less set of buttons to worry about. Size inspector can still be used. So I'm going to select this label, and if we go to the size inspector, it looks like a little vertical ruler over here. It's a little confusing, but this might look, you can customize the size completely here. This might look somewhat familiar from Visual Studio. This is a docking control. This object is currently docked to the left and to the top. And so as we change the size of the screen, it will stay to the upper left. If you wanted to change that, maybe make it center, we can turn these off by clicking on them. And this guy's annoying, but basically what it's showing you is what the object, the red box is the object. What's the object going to do as the screen size changes? It's going to stay in the middle of the screen right now, which is really not a bad idea. Right? Or we can pin it to the top, and now it stays at the top but stays centered. So that's not bad. And another one I've occasionally used, and this one seems to be harder to click lately, is that middle one. And notice how the object seems to stretch to say centered in the middle. So it's kind of a docking control. Let's test it. Let's leave that. Notice the object is staying in the middle. Let's leave that and run the program again. And by the way, I did that to this label. I probably should have selected both. So I'm going to select this one and do the same thing. Make it the middle. And then I'm going to run this. Fine, big deal. But where it really kicks in is where you go to the hardware, and if you know the rotation, here's the rotate. That's command left and command right. I'm going to rotate my screen. Notice how my text stays fairly centered in the screen. My second label is squished up a little bit. That's because we just said left and right, not up and down, and because the screen is squished. Now, one thing to be careful here, I rotated that to the right. If you rotate it to the right again, it doesn't work quite right. And the reason for that is in that very first screen that we saw, the properties, it says allow the device to be used upside down. That option was checked off. Nobody uses an iPhone upside down, I guess. All right, so that's why this is not working. So I need to actually rotate it to the left a couple of times to get it back to the way it was before. So what they're saying is you're going to rotate it this way, or you're going to rotate it that way if you're left-handed, I guess, but you're never going to turn it upside down. You can code for that so that it rotates. What I'm now going to do is pin it to the top, just to experiment a little bit. And this one as well, pin it to the top so it's always the same distance from the top. Run it one more time and rotate again, command either left or right. And now they stay better centered than they were before. And then always rotate back the other direction. So that auto sizing occasionally comes in handy if you're writing apps that rotate. A couple of our apps, we're going to fill this entire page, and if you rotate it, it makes a mess. That's by design. Some apps are not meant to be rotated, and you can turn the rotating feature off, and we'll talk about that well into the future. But that's a quick way. The hardware menu item up here lets you do things that are not available on the screen, like rotate or shake. I think the shake in an iOS phone can change channels on a radio station or pick a new song, or if you're playing games, who knows? I have seen that one. Shake the phone and rolls the dice. Kind of hard to simulate using a mouse. Okay. Questions? Making progress. Got two things on the form and running stuff. So now what? Change the attributes, make it bigger, align both labels, run and rotate. Just did that. Objects that contain text can be double-clicked to change text. We saw that. If a label's text doesn't change but overwrites instead, change the background color. That must have been an error or something that we discovered and fixed it. So that one's just kind of keep it in the back of your mind. All right, according to this, we want to add a date picker. Oh, we were talking about the drawing attributes. All objects have drawing attributes. And the book that we had before said we should change some of these. To get to the drawing attributes, select the objects. So I'm going to select them both. And I'm going to, I can't get to the drawing attributes if I do that. Okay, so I'm going to pick the top one. Oh, go back to the properties. I'm in size mode. That's why I couldn't get to the drawing attributes. Select them both. Excuse me. And if you scroll, here are the drawing attributes. What the authors of the book recommended is that we turn certain ones of these on and certain ones of them off. So you follow along and then you can help me do it while I read it here. The opaque should always be checked. It's not, right? By default, it's not checked. So what I often did in my applications last year is I put all the stuff on the form that I wanted, then selected everything and turned opaque on. This saves a little time because it tells iOS that it doesn't need to draw the stuff behind, that this label that I have is opaque, and if there's anything behind it, don't draw it. Saves a little bit of time. The exception might be labels, which is what we have, because labels have a transparent background. We want to be able to see through them. Hidden allows you to hide objects. We don't usually do that at design time, though you can do it at runtime and change it. Clear graphics context should always be off. Again, it saves time because iOS doesn't need to draw this transparent background first. Some of this stuff was a little over my head, but I'll take the author's advice. Clip view, leave it off. If stuff doesn't fit in the screen, what should we do? So clip view controls. And the auto size subviews, if we have views within views, that's beyond our scope. How should they be handled? So over here I have my two labels, and opaque is on, but the clear graphics context is off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did yours turn black like mine did?
Yep.
We don't want to do that for labels, so turn the opaque off. So labels are the exception. We could have changed the highlighted, the default, the background color. And that probably would have helped, but for labels, this didn't work. So let's add that date picker that my note suggested. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'm just going to scroll just to get more views here, trying to find something that looks like there's a picker, and there's the date picker. Again, I could have searched for date, and it probably would have found it, and drag one onto the form, and park it just underneath my label. Date picker has a bunch of properties. I'm going to change the mode from, well, let's leave it for right now, then we'll change it. Okay. We can change the minimum date. We can set a max date, very similar to Visual Studio. Can scale it to fill, which is what I'm doing right now, and a bunch of other things. But let's just run this to see what the date picker looks like. And notice you can just slide and spin. And if you just need one, a date or a time, the downside to the date time picker is what happens if I want to go to a different year. Whew, got a long way to spin. Right. Time, not so bad. Right. So date time, that works pretty well. Let's go back to the design view and say I just want this to be a date only picker. Then I get a little more flexibility. And I can spin the year, and I can spin the month, and I can spin the day. Now let's go back to the components, the drawing components of that object, turn off the opaque and turn off the clear. Is that one always supposed to be on? No, that's off too, right? Opaque and clear were both supposed to be off if I remember right.
Opaque
Opaque, always check this property, sorry. Hidden, clear graphics is the one that's always off, thank you. So, come back over here, turn the opaque back on, because then iOS does not need to draw anything that might be behind there. Like what? Like we might put wallpaper on this page. So that there's this texture behind everything. Well, we don't have to draw the texture in that section where this is. Could save a little bit of time, I guess. Run that again, and did anything change? Not really, but it should draw a little bit faster, is what that book recommended. The first unit, I'll be checking for that just to see if you know about it and remember it. After that, I'm not going to worry about it too much. As long as your app runs the way you want it to.
I'm sorry, where did you change the background opaqueness, the color? Because mine was defaulted to black.
Oh, we have.
I didn't change the color, I set the opaque to true.
Yeah, my opaque was set,
Yeah, for the label, you decided not to do that.
Yeah, for the label, we didn't do it because it kept blocking it out, because it's transparent. All right, for the interest of the recording, let's pause there, and we'll come back and have some more fun in just a little bit.